So here we are, the day after the day, Peter.
The day after the day, or the day before the day it should have been.
Last night, Peter Sage, my guest today, he was speaking for EO, Entrepreneurs Organization in Indonesia. And we had a big event, a lot of people in the room, and it was fantastic. And again, I already thanked you last night, but again, I want to thank you. It was a super event. I really, really learned a lot. And what I want to give to people, and you wanted to give to people, is a little gift, a little bonus, a little bit for free for people that might not have been in the EO event, or maybe people that just find this on the internet at a later stage and just, want to tune into you, find out who you are, what you do. So that's why we have a podcast with Peter Sage. Thank you for being here.
Pleasure.
So what I wanted to do, Peter, is you have a super interesting background. You're a public speaker. You're a human performance wizard. You teach people stuff. You've worked for Tony Robbins training for 15 years. You've been in EO for 10 years. You've built 27 companies all over the world. And you've experienced so much in the life so far. And it seems like you're putting that to use to help others. And that's what we want to talk about today.
Sure.
So how did this start? Where did that come from?
Wow. I guess my background is really about, I grew up I was born on a council estate, which is a low-cost government housing estate. Certainly didn't have a silver spoon. I did have good parents. I mean, I hear a lot of sob stories about people that, blame their parents for, not having the right start in life. And I believe that we choose our parents at a certain level,
Okay.
Which kind of gets rid of that victim story.
Yeah.
But for me, I can't pick fault with any of my parents. My father was actually quite a robust entrepreneur, kind of working class, rough and ready kind of guy.
Okay.
He was a deal maker. My mother was more of a Catholic minister.
Okay.
And she was also entrepreneurial, but she was very much a giver, very much a somebody who came from her heart wanting to help others. My dad was an atheist, and it was a very interesting dichotomy to grow up in. But I guess one thing it did teach me was the ability to have tolerance for other people's model of the world. Mm-hmm. And I see so much conflict coming from other people demonstrating that their model of the world is right, therefore yours has to be wrong. And I never really took that on. So it wasn't that I was conflict averse. I grew up in an area that was open to possibility of live and let live. And I think that had a profound impact on how I saw the world.
Right. Got it. So what would you say this environment you grew up in, what kind of core values did it teach you and give you from young on?
Well, I saw my parents work hard. And so I did have the ethic around if something's worth having, it's worth working for.
Okay.
There's no free lunch, there's no free ride. Life doesn't owe you a living, but it's possible. If you want to go out there, it's available. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like life is a kitchen. It provides all of the ingredients, the pots, the pans, the gas, the electric, all of the stuff you need, but you can't sit there and complain that you're hungry. You've got to do the work to make the food.
You got to cook it.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people there are saying, hey, listen, I'm hungry, life owes me a living. It doesn't work that way. Or they put a half-hearted attempt in and then wonder why it doesn't taste good. And not only that, I find life gives you an incredible feedback mechanism. If I oversalt the food, it tastes salty. Guess what? I can work with that. If I put the pizza in the oven for too long, it's burnt. I can work with that. If I burnt the pizza and I oversalted the food and it came out great, I'd be confused.
Right.
So there's a rule set that governs how we operate in life that's designed to give us perfect feedback. And so if we're complaining at a fixed rule set, which is kind of stupid. And so learn how the rules work, and then you can apply yourself to them. And that's really where a lot of my initial passion for wanting to learn the rules came about.
Okay. So was money an important issue when you were young? Was it like you wanted to be rich, you wanted to be wealthy? Was that...
I wanted to be one of these things that I'd heard about and saw people on TV called an entrepreneur.
Okay.
And I never really saw, money wasn't a big thing because we grew up without a lot. So I never really had, it's like before, you're kind of my age, you know what it was like before mobile phones. And we didn't miss mobile phones before they were invented.
That's right.
So I didn't miss money through not having it because I'd not experienced it.
Gotcha.
So I wanted to be an entrepreneur because school for me didn't work. I saw a fundamental flaw with the school system because all it taught was how to pass tests and work for somebody else.
Right.
And I couldn't understand why people would go and get a job because a job, by its very definition, would always pay you less than what you're worth. And the reason for that, even if you're earning good money, let's say $1,000 a week, which puts you in the top 1% of people on the planet ever.
That's right.
That means that the job has to be worth more than $1,000 a week, otherwise there's no value to the business owner.
That's right.
So why, by definition, would you settle for less than what you're worth? And I could never want to put a cap on that for me. I'd like, why put a ceiling above me and give a margin out of that to somebody who is essentially my job security?
Right.
So for me, being an entrepreneur was always a passion. And then when I started getting to the age, like late teens, image and insecurity is big in that area. Probably a lot bigger today than it was then, because social media now, everybody's looking at you, whereas before it was just your own peer group, your own social circle. Now it's globally within a click of the mouse. So I wanted to prove to the world I was good enough, which was the insecurities I had as a young man, and business became the vehicle with which I committed to do that with. So that's really where the passion for wanting to go get money, because I thought in those days money was what validated you. Rather than understand the reality, which is money is nothing more than a consequence or a byproduct of how much value you add, and we use money to measure that.
Okay. And money was a way to validate that. Was it because you knew people that were wealthy at that stage that you looked up to, or not really? Not
personally. I didn't have that level of peer group, but I remember being in my little Mini at the time, and this was a car that was worth like $70.
Yeah, and you're 2 meters close to 2 meters, right?
Yes, I didn't fit in a Mini, but it was all that was left in the scrapyard. And I remember driving it to where the rich houses were. And I would park outside, and I would get out my goal journal, and I would write down the goals that I'd want. I'd visualize myself sitting in the house, not sitting in the cheap car outside the house.
Yeah.
And that was, for me, was a big part of really associating and building the belief system that it was possible.
Yeah.
I was expanding my comfort zone.
Yeah.
A lot of people have a comfort zone financially that is pretty much where they're at right now. They may say consciously they want to be rich, but they'd feel uncomfortable being around people who were at the level that they say they aspire to, and therefore they pretty much sabotage against it unconsciously.
For me, just something came to me that I never realized. When I was young, I lived in a small village, and there was one area, one postal code where all the wealthy people lived. And now I remember when you're telling the story, I had a few friends that lived there when I was in elementary school. And now I think about it, I was always wondering how do they do that, right? How come their parents can live here? We were okay. My dad had a shop. We were quite okay, well off. Not well off. We were comfortable. But there were these people that drove, fancy cars. They had this huge house outside the village usually, because that's where the rich people live, in the woods. And I thought, wow, how do they do that? I just came to realize that was like one of these moments where I thought, not I want to be like them, but it was a moment where I thought, hey,
how does it happen?
There's another thing in life, apparently.
Well, I have a crystal clear memory of driving when I was 17 to the bar to see my guys. I used to play pool for a living. That's how I made some of my money when I was 17. And I heard this noise. And I looked in the rearview mirror, and there was a Ferrari Testarossa behind me. It looked like something had just landed from a spaceship from outer space, and it was the noise was deafening. It was just captivating. And I was transfixed. I almost didn't see where I was going. And I ended up pulling over. The car went past me. I stayed there for 30 seconds. I turned the car around. I went home, and I started getting, again, my journal out and started getting goals. Because the insight to me, Erik, was they wouldn't make cars like that if people didn't have the ability to figure out a way to buy them. And that was a massive revelation for me. It's like, whoa, it's not you're not born rich. It's not the happy, lucky, rich cloud comes along and just happens to rain on you. No, these people, most millionaires today, started with nothing.
That's right.
Yeah. So there has to be a way, and if there's a way, I can figure it out.
Right.
And I bought my first Ferrari Testarossa at 25.
Yeah, you told that story last night. I was very touched by that. Basically, so at 17 you had this vision, you wrote it down, and then at 25 you finally did it, right? Maybe you can share the short version of the story of last night, how you came to that point and what happened at that point.
Well, it was all about trying to validate myself.
Right.
I was chasing what I thought was success, only to really be digging a grave with the frustrations of always thinking I needed more. Yes, if you go back to when you're 10 years old and you have the 10-year-old version of you look at the 25 version of you, 25-year-old version of you, that 10-year-old will probably think, wow, you made it.
Mm-hmm.
The places you went, the money you were earning, the car you drove, think, wow. Because the contrast frame from 10 is wow. Now at 25, you don't feel like you've made it. But maybe the 35-year-old version, you look at and you think, well, okay, that's doing pretty good. But at 35, you don't feel like you've made it. So I thought I needed $1 million to validate myself, and then I'll have made it. But guess what? I get my first $1 million, and then I'm like, well, no, I don't feel like I've made it. I obviously need $2 million in case I lose the first. And that game never stops. So for me, buying my Ferrari, yes, it was a massive goal, my first Ferrari, but it made me happy for about a week. And then the novelty wore off. It was like, okay, what's next? I thought I'd feel like I've made it because I'm trying to use something external to validate a missing feeling that's internal. And that will never work no matter how many cars you have. So, and you only have to look around to see examples of that. Robin Williams, Elvis Presley, Marilyn Monroe, James Belushi, all Kurt Cobain, all of the intelligent people massively unhappy with all of the success because they thought that's what it would take to make them fulfilled, and they ended up running into a wall.
So for you, at what age was your turning point on this particular issue, whereby you figured out that money and wealth and houses and these things actually don't make you a lot more happier than without it?
There was two primary, what I call significant emotional events. And our lives are shaped by our significant emotional events, not by our intellectually strong events. So the first one was when I was working so hard, 130 to 133 hours a week. Not something I'd recommend. And I was driving home one night from the office at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I fell asleep and hit an intersection at 60 miles an hour. Came very close to killing myself. Luckily, nobody else was involved. And I wasn't hurt that badly. The car wasn't too happy. But I remember sitting at the side of the road waiting for the tow truck thinking, whoa, what just happened? What am I doing? I was running 8 companies at the time. I'm like in my mid-20s. I've got dozens of staff and offices and overheads and budgets and I, again, working like an absolute madman, no life, thinking I needed 9 businesses, obviously, and then it'll all be okay. And I'm building a monster that's trapping me. Whereas, that's not the game. That's not what I signed up for. So at that point, I started to design myself out of the equation. And that was a big turning point for me as an entrepreneur. Later, a couple of years later, the biggest shift in being able to get off that hamster wheel to nowhere was understanding the difference between a life driven by significance and control, certainty, versus a life that is driven by growth and contribution, the two primary laws of nature. And when I switched my primary driving need from significance to growth and contribution, everything changed. Now it didn't matter how many cars I had or didn't have, or if I lost the business or if I didn't. Now it didn't matter if somebody cared about what I drove or what I did. Now it was a case of there's something bigger than me involved here, and I'm becoming the best of who I am to try to express that. And that was the biggest turning point for me.
Okay, so at that point, did you change those 8 businesses and started doing something else, or what did you do?
I sold off some, I stopped some naturally died, and I started to focus on what I could do with business as a vehicle to help people, to make a difference to people, to add value to people, not to make money so that I could buy another car so I think I could feel good for another week.
Right, so what was the first business you started?
After that, it was called the Worldwide Health Corporation.
Okay.
And it was really a case of having a commitment to finding out what natural products would make the biggest difference to people in terms of anti-aging, in terms of health, in terms of getting off pharmaceutical drugs, in terms of combating a lot of the issues around the big pharma cartels that are essentially the largest currently globally leading cause of death. More than cancer, more than heart disease, number one leading cause of death today is correctly prescribed pharmaceutical drugs. And when people wake up to that, they usually start asking there's a better way. So it's really re-educating people outside of the traditional white coat level of authority, which are essentially drug salesmen. Well, with the best will in the world, some doctors have beautiful hearts and get into that profession because they're committed to helping people. But doctors are only allowed by law to prescribe drugs and recommend surgery.
Yes.
Anything outside of that, they can get sued for.
Yeah, if they recommend alternative medicine or don't take medicine, they can be liable for that, right?
And most doctors, if you do your research, have a shorter life expectancy than the average human.
So why is that?
because most are addicted to their own drugs, if you do your research, and most of them are not a picture of health themselves. Most of them are stressed out of their brain because they see all these people they're trying to help, but they're really just contributing to the problem. They're prolonging the problem. Yeah, drugs call it side effects. They're not side effects, they're direct effects. Yeah, you may soften the language, but they're direct effects of the drug, hence why it's the leading cause of death.
Right.
Now, if you're looking at an acute situation, drugs have a role to play. If I'm in a road accident and I need morphine, I'll take the morphine, thank you very much.
Yes.
Or if I need a drug to be able to slow down my heart rate in that particular situation, then that is a phenomenal use of modern medicine.
Right.
But to treat a chronic condition with toxic pharmaceuticals long term is a fast track to causing complications that they'll use to sell you more pharmaceutical drugs to try to correct the complications that create more complications.
Understood.
And so the Worldwide Health I was passionate about that because I got so many letters from people that were saying, wow, I'm off my blood pressure medication. Wow, I'm off this. And I never rewarded my staff through sales figures. We didn't have sales targets. I rewarded my staff through how many letters we got from the customers praising either the product or the service.
Okay, what was the product you were selling?
At that time, it was DHEA, dehydroepiandrosterone. I was the first guy to pioneer that into Europe as an anti-aging hormone, which is available widely in America, but the British Medicines Control Agency were restricting it, not because of its lack of potency or efficiency. Every researcher or biochemist that studied it is on it, but because it was a threat to the sales of the pharmaceutical drugs.
Yeah, you see that very often. Anything that's referred to sales of medicine or medical treatments is usually treated with,
absolutely.
a
And
lot of
we're
anger
starting to move because the public is starting to wake up.
Right.
And I'll finish the story by sharing with you what one of my magic moments was that really cemented the original point. And that is, I used to pay my girls a bonus of £5 in cash for every letter that we got, saying, wow, thank you for taking care of me, or thank you for this. And at the end of the week, they'd come in the office and I paid in cash. And this was probably about £50, £60 per girl. Now, if they're on, at that time, this is 1997, 98, so, 20 years ago now. And they would be on £200 a week, kind of not minimum wage, but not far off. 18, 19 years old. That £60 was tax-free, was a significant amount of money to them. It was like a third of their wages almost. And I remember them coming up one time and knocking on my office door, and I had this like two-way glass I could see what was going on. And I saw them all line up. I'm like, come in. And they all filed in. I'm like, what's up, girls? They're like, well, boss, we want to talk to you. I says, okay, what about? Says, want to talk to you about the bonuses. Of course, as a boss, what am I thinking? Yeah,
They want more. They want more.
They want more, right? Now they want $7.50 a letter or £10 or what have you. And I'm like, okay. They says, we want you to stop paying it. Okay. I'm like, why? I'll never forget what they said. It almost made me cry. They said, we don't want you to think we're doing it for the money as opposed to how it makes us feel when we read the letters. And I was like, boom. I had goosebumps now. And it really taught me the whole difference between trying to chase success and trying to chase fulfillment and doing the right thing.
Right.
And that's when business for me completely changed.
Yeah, amazing. Last night you spoke about the three most important games in life. We spoke about one, which is money. We spoke about the second one, which is health. Yeah, and the third one is relationships. Right. Why are those three games, as you call them, for you the most important games in life?
Well, they're the games that are non-negotiable to play. They're the games that if you choose not to play it consciously, it will play you. If you don't master the money game, I've got news for you. You're going to suffer for it.
Right.
If you don't master the relationship game, you're going to suffer for it. If you don't master the health game, there's consequences.
Right.
Whereas every other game in life is optional. You can play the academic game and go and study for the next 10 years. That's optional. And if you don't do it, there's no consequences. You can study you can play the religion game. If you don't study that, there's no real consequences.
Yeah.
Or you can study the enlightenment game. You can study the arts game. You can study the I want to be an actor game. There's many different games in life that are optional, but those three are non-negotiable. By the very fact that you live in a 21st century society, those three games are ongoing, and you either participate consciously or you're penalized for not participating.
Right.
That's why they're the three most important games really to get down. Then you're free to choose what you want to go play with.
Right.
But you can't choose to play the money game willy-nilly.
Right. So you gotta master all three of them at a certain level, right?
Correct.
You don't need to be the expert in all of them. You might choose one that is your favorite. Maybe health is your favorite, but you can't ignore the other two. right?
Say the 3 games. I'll put it nice and simply. If you don't choose to play them, they will play you.
Yeah.
And if you don't make time for health, you will have to make time for illness.
Right.
That's just a binary equation.
Yeah.
Pick one.
Yeah.
If you don't master the money game, then you are destined to be a victim of somebody who has mastered the money game, and therefore you're never going to buy your own house. You're going to be paying somebody else who owns the house.
Yeah.
If you don't master the relationship game, you're going to get some pretty immediate feedback the next time you're on a date. Because relationships and intimate relationships are the ultimate crucible of human interaction, where, again, response and feedback is pretty immediate and can be pretty painful.
Right.
Especially when you bring in the average insecurities that most people have, including fear of not being good enough, fear of rejection, fear of being judged, all of that. That's magnified in a relationship way more than anywhere else.
Yeah, I got you. I'm going completely off topic here.
Sure.
You're a person, now I've experienced you for close to 24 hours. You're a person that is very conceptual. You can express yourself very eloquently, but you have a thinking pace that is beyond most people's thinking pace, I feel. How do you relate with people that need more time to process what you're trying to tell them? How do you do that? Because many entrepreneurs and many intelligent people are like you, right? They tend to talk fast. They tend to express concepts and ideas and relate and enjoy connecting the dots of things. But some people are slower in comprehending these things. Mm-hmm. So if you have somebody across you that is like that, how do you find a way to then still manage to get across what you want to get across?
Understood. The benefit of something like this as a podcast means people can go and re-listen to it, which is why I'm going at a bit of a pace.
That's fine.
And I'm trying to
You're fine. You're fine. For me, you're fine. No problem.
Trying to cram as much value in this as possible. But the responsibility of the teacher is to meet the student where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
So anything other than that is ego.
Mm-hmm.
The goal of every teacher should be for their students to excel them. Anything other than that is ego.
Right.
And unfortunately, we see that in a lot of academia. I sat on the board of advisors for one of the world's top business schools for many years, INSEAD in Fontainebleau in Paris.
Yep, I know it.
And I was amazed how most of the teachers were using their position of authority to justify their significance. I'm the teacher, you're the student, you do what I tell you, I'm the authority.
And if you can't follow me, that's your problem. You go back and read the book.
Exactly. And they were more committed to their business title or their tenure than they were growing the significance and the greatness of others. Very rare would you see a teacher who would do that, and we all remember the ones in our school that did.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for me, if I'm sitting across from somebody, my responsibility is to find out where they're at. You can't take a PhD teacher and go and teach PhD level in kindergarten. Now, that doesn't mean that they're better or worse. That's a frame that comes from ego.
Mm-hmm.
What's better, a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old?
Mm-hmm.
Well, none. What's better, an acorn or an oak tree? They're just at different levels of expressing their own potential on their own timeline.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm with somebody who doesn't have any history of personal growth, and they're in their victim story,
mm-hmm.
I wouldn't come in there at some level of high consciousness enlightenment where I can make distinctions that'll change their life, because they can't hear it.
Mm-hmm.
People can only ever hear from the level they're at, which is why if you take something like Jesus as a spiritual teacher, absolutely masterful, but most people at the level of consciousness 2,000 years ago weren't at the level where they could hear the messages from the place they were given. So therefore there was a lot of misinterpretation, which is what's led to a lot of the bastardization of religion as it's spread and now becomes one of the single biggest causes of human conflict globally. Completely the antithesis of what the original message was trying to teach, which from Jesus' perspective was unconditional love.
Mm-hmm.
You take the Buddha taught enlightenment. That was the difference. But for me, if I'm sitting across from somebody, my responsibility as a teacher or somebody who wants to help is find out where they're at and what's their next level. You can't get somebody who is in apathy into courage. It's too big of a step. Can you get them into hope? That's a starting point. Can you get them into anger? That is a really good place to get somebody who's in apathy. Why? Because anger has energy to it. So you need to understand in life there are categories. Mm-hmm. And if you don't understand categories, you'll start blanketing people and missing out on the nuances of how to help. So anger is a very useful place if you're in apathy because you've got energy. Now, if you can channel that energy Anger, there's a positive category to anger. You can use anger to galvanize determination to get out of your current circumstances. Or you can use anger to justify and blame everybody and go smack somebody who you don't agree with. Mm-hmm. Yeah, positive and negative ways of expression.
Right.
And a good teacher should be able to channel that into a positive expression. But yes, you're right. If you can't expect anybody to hear a message from anywhere other than the level that they're at. But I'm a great believer that people wouldn't be guided to this conversation we're having had they not be ready for half the stuff we're talking about.
Yes, agree. So all this experience, all this life that you've lived, came to a significant graduation event, as you call them, which I love it. I mean, you've introduced concepts for me that are fantastic. So Peter last night spoke about that in our life we have graduation events, events where significant emotional change happens, either good or bad, but mostly, adversity, difficulties, struggles. And basically, you built up your whole life. You had various businesses. You were in this place where you were serving people. You were building businesses that were serving people. You had followers. You had clients. You had people online following your programs. And then in 2017, there was a significant event. The event is actually written in this beautiful new book that you've written. And we spoke about it last night, Inside Track. What was the event? How did it happen in short, maybe, because and then because I really want to talk about, so after that event, what's your life about now and how has it changed? So what happened? What was your graduation event?
I'll give you, again, just a mini context of the graduation event. I believe that one of the most significant evolutions of the human psyche is when we finally realize that we are in a growth-centric experience rather than a comfort-centric experience. Life is about being in what I call Earth School. Now, if you don't have a context for understanding school, then you're going to start complaining about the tests and why you're being forced to sit down and listen to this guy talk and why you're having to march down the corridor to the next lesson, and you're going to start resenting it. You're going to start hiding in the corridor. You're going to start playing truant. You're going to start looking for excuses not to participate because you don't have a context for it. Now, people say, well, what's the purpose of school? Well, it's very simple. The purpose of school is to provide an environment where you can make better choices in relation to your potential education. It's not to give you an education. It's not to teach you anything. It's to provide an environment where you can make choices through your free will on how to apply yourself in that context towards education.
Right.
So you can choose to show up for class. You can choose to apply yourself and revise, and that will have a likely outcome when it comes to graduation. Or you can choose to skip school, go partying, get drunk, and that will likely have a different outcome when it comes to graduation.
But it also might teach you lessons you need to learn, right? So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
But if you didn't have a context for school, then you wouldn't understand that.
Right.
And if the teachers came one day and says, hey guys, got some great news. Yep, no more tests. You don't have to show up. Come in when you like. Everything's cool. Oh, by the way, nobody graduates. You'd be like, whoa, hang on a minute. No. I'm here because I want to get my MBA or my degree or whatever it is. So Earth School operates the same way. When we realize that life is a growth-centric experience, we can expect tests, we can expect graduation events, we can expect surprise, snap exams, because that's just part of the learning. Now, if you don't have context for that, you're going to resist them. You're going to complain. You want to play truant. You want to hide out. You want to point fingers at the teachers. Why is this guy giving me this test? But when you understand that we're here to grow, because you only have to look out of the window and see that that's what happens in nature, you understand it. So for me, I had a graduation event, as you mentioned, in 2017. I was arguing a business deal in court with a major multinational, and it was a civil action. Now, I think they were being bullies. I was resisting. They threw a contempt of court application at me, which I thought was nothing but a chess move. That's how court works. So I didn't take it very serious. And I show up to court thinking that it'll get thrown out in 5 minutes, and I learned a lot about how the court system works and who has the most money to hire the best lawyers. They sold it to the judge, and I ended up doing 6 months in prison as a civil prisoner, which is
for contempt of court.
For contempt of court.
You basically hadn't followed what the court told you to do in this particular case. Right?
And a lot of that as well, I learned about my ego in court, because my contempt for what I thought the other side were doing spilled over into the courtroom. Well, I wasn't there to really blame them or have a go at them or fight them, which is where I was, because I'm an indigo child. I resist institutional authority. And what I should have been there was to be far more contrite and apologize to the court for any misperception as to what happened and explain it out. Because I felt genuinely I'd done no wrong. And, of course, that didn't happen. And so from turning around to my team, I had 53 staff at that point, and saying, I've just got to pop into court in a couple of days. And I've got to go sort this thing out.
Because
walked in.
right away after the verdict of you were in contempt, you had to go to prison.
Oh yeah, there was the guy was there in with the handcuffs waiting to take me down the steps.
Holy moly. Okay.
And I basically walked down the steps, and just before that happened, I recognized that everything in life, as we flow along the river of life, there's no straight lines. Every river bends. And most of us resist the bends because they don't fit the pictures of what our left brain says it should look like in the outer world. What I've learned over the years, Erik, is that if you surrender to the wisdom of the current, if you learn to flow with the river rather than resist it, it usually works out well in the end. Because life is smarter than you, certainly our left brain. And so for me, walking down the steps, I realized that, for a start, number one, you cannot resist what has already happened. That's a big mistake most people make, where they waste most of their energy. If you're resisting what's already happened, it's futile, because you can't go back and change anything. You can only release the level of resistance, get to a place of acceptance, and then from a place of acceptance, use the freed up energy to channel into making a better decision on how to deal with what's happened.
Right.
It's not apathy. It's not, oh, well, I'll just surrender to whatever's happened and be a victim. No. It's okay. Resisting the fact the milk is spilt is stupid. That's not going to put it back in the bottle. But letting go of that and then figuring out a way to mop up the mess is a far better way of doing it. So walking down the steps to prison, I realized that this is a graduation event. If I'm a positive psychologist, if I'm a person who helps people in many different areas, I've coached high-level CEOs, been on stage with presidents. I mean, I'm known in the industry for knowing how to deal with stuff like this and giving advice on it. If I can't demonstrate that myself, you should never listen to another word I say. So I never went down the steps as a prisoner. That was the first thing I chose. I didn't choose the identity of a prisoner at all. Not for 1 second in the entire 6 months did I even see myself as a prisoner. I went in as a secret agent of change to go help people that wouldn't normally get access to the kind of work that I do. And that was my that was my impetus. And that's how I went in. And I ended up getting a lot of the people off drugs. I ended up stopping suicides. I got nominated and then eventually won a national award for the work I was doing in there. I got letters of commendation from the governors, the prisoners themselves, the officers. And every 2 weeks, I wrote to my senior coaching clients telling them what I was doing.
Right.
And these letters were private letters. They were never meant for the public. And it was the highest level of tradecraft on what I've been teaching. How can you walk into a prison losing everything? I lost my business. I got hundreds of thousands in debt on legal costs. My reputation, was in the press, was all, because nobody knew what was going on. And how can I still smile, still keep it together, deal with all of the trauma and the violence and the drugs and all of that was in there, which was horrific, and still make a difference and come out and eventually change the system and help dozens of people in the process? And that's what I was writing these letters for. And as you say, we came out and my coaching client said, wow, we learned more from the letters because it was real. I'm not on stage. There's no cameras, no second takes. It was real. That's what counts. And so we published it. It went bestseller in 2 hours, Amazon #1 in 4 hours, and it's changed the lives of virtually everybody that's read the book. I'm very humbled. Yeah.
All of it captured in this beautiful book, Inside Track. Okay, so book's out. I've started reading it. It's very condensed, so the pages have a lot of stuff in each of them. It's not a light book. I really enjoyed the first bit that I started reading. What's your life now? What's your maybe refound purpose, or your new purpose, or your next chapter?
Well, again, when I went in there, I knew what my mission in life was. I've known that's been clear for a while, to help raise the global consciousness of humanity in a way that empowers people to live the best version of themselves. That's it. Now, that hasn't really changed since I came out. The first thing I focused on was, having lost everything, was how do I honor the obligations that were outstanding when I went away? Because we just sold 100 tickets to my business school, my 3-day event that I've done around the world for the last 10 years. All of the money gone. People want their money back. A lot of people held a space for me but weren't sure. But when I came out, I had nothing. And I owed all of these people a seminar. I owed people trips around the world. So I focused on how do I get back on my feet to generate enough revenue to basically honor those obligations. And that took me 18 months, but out of 150 people, I issued 2 refunds.
Right.
And I was so proud of that. And so now I'm focused on really putting a lot of the work that's been enriched through that experience, because again, I learned a lot out of that as well. I learned stuff from the prisoners. I learned stuff from people who spent most of their life in prison and some of what their insights was and how to help them. So I bring all of that into my work at a deeper level. And I'm still doing my coaching and my executive coaching. I obviously travel around, as you saw, and give talks to high-level groups. And I'm just very blessed that this is my life's work, and it's got even better as a result of taking that exam.
Right. Well, I wish you all the best with that. Before I ask you my final question, check out Peter on petersage.com. Go and get the Inside Track's latest book. Reach out to Peter. We've only really touched, I think, on a very small part of what you do and what you can do for people. So I would invite everybody to just find you online. It's easy to find. There's some TED Talks. There's some really good interviews with you, and just reach out. And I found out that if reaching out to your team is very quick, and you get a response if you have a need, if you have an interest, then they'll get back to you. So my final question, and I've asked this many people, but I think this is the most appropriate time to ask it. What does the word freedom mean to you, Peter?
Freedom is a state of mind. One of the biggest impacts I made in the prisoners was teaching them the difference between freedom and liberty. The only thing that had been taken away or restricted was my liberty, which means my decision space was smaller. I couldn't choose to go and walk my dogs. I couldn't choose to go and spend my birthday with my fiancée. I couldn't choose to attend my wedding that should have been happening while I was away. I mean, it had a big impact. But freedom is a state of mind. Nobody can take that away. And so for me, understanding that you are free to always make decisions, you are free to find the gratitude in life no matter what. The first thing I'd do when I woke up in the morning was find things to be grateful for, even while I was in prison. And I was grateful for the experience. I was grateful for the ability to work with people I'd never normally get a chance to. I was grateful for the ability to be able to impact a system that clearly needed me in there at some level, and has gone on to be impacted prisons all over the UK and the world now with the stuff that I was doing there. And so for me, freedom is a state of mind, and to be able to let go of the limitations of your expectations, to let go of trying to struggle upstream in the river of life and surrender to that wisdom of the current. You're free to breathe. You're free to be able to go out and be who you are. And at that level, nobody's in prison.
Thank you, Peter.
Pleasure.